Good evening and welcome to episode 12 of ListenIn with Sunaparanta, our virtual platform where we have creative minds that come together and share with us their experiences and let us into their worlds a little bit. This evening we bring to you Madhavi Gore, Nikhil Chopra and Romain Loustau, contemporary performance artists and co-founders of Heritage Hotel Art Spaces, known popularly as HH, operating out of our home turf in Goa since 2014. HH is known for its eclectic residencies and recognized as the only space in India dedicated to live art and performance practice. Since it was founded, HH has attracted artists across the world, turning it into a site that repeatedly challenged and expanded the language of art, how it's made and experienced. We at Sunaparanta have collaborated with HH on several occasions, and this will be our first virtual collaboration. The people here with us today, I hold a special place for in my heart because I'm also lucky to call them friends. Madhavi Gore is a painter, live artist, and writer. Her explorations in the live moment have lent performativity to her process as a painter in the enclosed studio. At the heart of her practice is an aesthetic response to time in the act of making. She has presented work at the Kolkata International Performance Art Festival, Theatre International Performance Art Platform in Colombo, a show titled Bhairav as part of New Art Exchange in Nottingham, among others. Nikhil Chopra is a performance artist whose artistic practice ranges between live art, drawing, photography, sculpture, and installations. His performances dwell on issues such as identity, the role of autobiography, the pose and self-portraiture, transformation, and time. Nikhil has been part of several solo and group exhibitions across the world, a few among them being the artist in residence at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Yinchuan Biennale, the Havana Biennale, Gallery Continua in Italy, the Bhaudadilad Museum in Goa, and of course at Sunaparanta. Romain Loustau is a French artist who works and lives the enviable life between Paris and Goa. Romain studied drama and spent many years acting on stage and has collaborated with rock bands. From theatre to scenography to more inherently conceptualized performances, Romain is interested in materializing inner conflicts created by our ambivalent positions on this world as a species. Thank you, all three of you, for being with us today. Today's conversation will trace the beginnings of performance art in our country, the roots of which led to the formation of collectives like HH. The conversation will also address the challenges for performance art today. How will we live with this live art? How will we experience it? How will we view it? How will we listen to it? And how will we perform it, most importantly? And with that, I will hand it over to Leandre de Souza, who will be in conversation with our artists.
Thank you, Ishita, and looking forward to this exciting conversation with Madhavi, Nikhil, and Romain. I was thinking that we can begin today's discussion by trying to understand what performance art is, considering that it is a medium that marks a shift in the representation of an artwork where it is now experienced in real time and space, and through the body that becomes the subject and object of the work.
Just want to take a minute for a second actually to say thank you very much for inviting us. Thank you very much for partnering with us for so many years and being really part of the community and making us feel very much at home in Goa, as we are all actually outsiders to begin with. We've all come from somewhere else. But just the fact that we all feel at home here is sort of represented in the way in which we've connected even in this conversation. So I want to say thank you on behalf of HH. We can segue right into, I think we've had a couple of really nice discussions leading up to this presentation. And one of the things that we wanted to talk to you all about was where perhaps performance began as a serious kind of art form within the visual art world, and how we can kind of look at it as a historic overview. But I think we concluded that we'd much rather focus on how performance begins in South Asia. I was not to look at performance practices in South Asia historically, not just from the perspective of performance art, I think that history goes back thousands of years. I mean, we are innately extremely performative as human beings, but also particularly in the way in which we've told stories and the way in which certain rituals are carried out and the way in which festivals are played out. The body and the way in which transformation sort of takes over the body is a tradition that is thousands of years old. And in a sense, where South Asia's history starts is not just in the last 20 years, but to draw attention to the contemporary art world, I think that when I was in Baroda, I was very drawn to perhaps an artist like Bhupen Khakkar. And, if you look at his incredible paintings, it was himself as a kind of performative personality, but also how he bears his body in a very kind of stark, in a very kind of brutal, in a very kind of confrontational way. In a sense, he takes risks that, with his identity especially, that perhaps have risks that were perhaps never taken before. And in a sense, that to me, and to all of us at HH, and you'll see us lead into that idea of taking risks is extremely crucial, especially when you put your very being in danger and you put your very sense of self and your body in danger. And I think that this to me seems, in a certain sense, and also Bhupen goes on to do sort of photo performances in the 70s and 80s, which becomes a very kind of freeing symbol, in a sense, for the people that then went on to study. And as I think India started to get exposed, in a sense, to art practices outside of, let's say, the Indian realm, when markets opened up, when the internet arrived, I think a lot of us were starting to look at performance work that was happening in the West. And, a lot of what started to happen was a lot of collectives, very exciting collectives, started to emerge, of which Khoj is a very interesting player. Artists like Subodh and Anita Dubey, really kind of, and Manmeet and but we really see them kind of becoming, and Inder Salim, these became really very interesting, in a sense, risk takers who at that time came together not just to create Khoj, but also to challenge the way in which the art world worked, so that we started to think beyond painting, sculpture, installation. We wanted to think beyond art as an object. We wanted to think about the body as a primary tool, as a political tool. And someone like Inder sort of really kind of risks that, especially with pieces where he kind of takes on public spaces and he takes on Delhi in a very confrontational manner as a kind of Kashmiri artist with a split sort of Hindu-Muslim identity.
One question. So basically, artists start to use the body to address specific social, cultural, political concerns.
Yes.
That starts off from the 1970s and then goes on through the 90s.
Yes, which kind of leads us into the 2000s, when Khoj International Artists Association in Delhi really starts to emerge as a solid organization, a solid residency space that really offers that freedom and that kind of platform to artists that go beyond the market. And here's Anita doing a very critical work where she cuts meats like words into words and has this very kind of discursive conversation. So these are, I would say, some of the first really full-blown iterations of what we understand today as, let's say, performance art, where the body, its insides and its outside become, in a sense, the primary tools of engagement. And the site for a political sort of discourse to happen. And if we keep moving on, we'll see how Khoj in a sense, kind of creates then residencies that are specifically focused around performance art. And in a sense, this is when I also start to find a voice within the South Asian context after having returned from the US to begin to understand the language of performance and how that fits within the South Asian context. So I would say these are all, you know, leading in from what artists like Manmeet Devgan and Shantanu did with Art Maharaj, and the very radical performances that they did, and Khoj Live with inviting artists of the caliber of Boris Nielsen of the Black Market Group, and you know, kind of really bringing contemporary performance to Delhi. I think that gave a lot of young artists at that time the confidence, and, you know, also contextualized our work within the language of performance art, you know. So I would say that, you know, as Khoj kind of develops into a much more of an institution, we in 2012, if we can move quickly past these images, and, you know, even watching images of Neha Choksi do this piece where she anesthesias animals, and Rehan Engineer doing a theater artist and a contemporary artist doing an all-night reading in a room that looked like hospital beds but also looked like a dormitory. I mean, these were pretty ahead of their time, I would say. And I think that this was a very rich time also in India, you know, when India was also emerging in the international scene, you know, with big exhibitions that were traveling through Europe. You know, under the belly of that, there were a lot of experiments that were going on that kind of celebrated this sort of progressive phase in our growth, you know. And I do feel that this time, in a sense, has not come back.
So was there already an audience and an understanding of performance art by this point, Nikhil?
I would say they have an understanding of performance, and I wouldn't necessarily say performance art per se. I think they're aware of performance, and I think that they're aware of art. I mean, when you see Stephen Cohen walk down the streets like this, you do realize that this is a very deliberate, aesthetically created moment, that where Stephen Cohen wants to separate himself from the ordinary and wants to put himself in this very extraordinary space and walk down the streets of Khirki in Delhi. I mean, this moment was bubbling and vibrating with not just tension, but with delight, because you can see even on this picture, the audience is enthralled and inquisitive and curious. So this kind of format becomes very interesting, where Khoj takes on Khirki village in Delhi and, in a sense, bridges the gap between what contemporary art is and how it's perceived to work within white cube spaces. And in a way, this sort of brings it out onto the streets. So, you know, in a sense, that was a nutshell in what was happening at that time. And in 2013, while in Goa, after having had some time in Berlin running an art space there, I met Roma, and when he had moved from Paris to Goa, and we started this conversation about the need for an experimental studio space, where it's not just us practicing our own ideas and experiments, but also inviting artists to interact with us, and sort of how to think about live art as a studio practice. And Roma, what were you thinking? I would love to remember what was going on in your mind at the time.
Yeah, it's a good point, because so first, hi to everyone, because first time I talk. No, it was a good point. When we met, the idea was for me to really start with having a place to create, because, as a lot of people know, Paris, as London, as big cities are difficult places for artists to work, to have a space. So I moved from Paris, arriving in Goa. That was actually like a first goal, but meeting the people, knowing better the context, week after week and month after month, uh, there was this strange phenomenon where I really felt that that was and I still don't know why I felt that really precisely, but I really wanted to start something in Goa. I don't know, like I met so many artists there, so many interesting people, thinking, thought, processes. There is maybe a bit more time than in a lot of places, and I feel that all these kind of factors like were just like telling me and just stop like for a bit here. And that's when we met, and we both had this idea in mind for probably different little reason. I mean, but the main goal was actually to have a place to create and to maintain like this uh, uh, the capacity, the ability to exchange with other artists. So the ability to invite people in the place. It was, you said, it was never like to be on our own and create and doing this race, but more like engaging with everybody around. Actually, everybody who wanted to come would be allowed to come, because one of the beginning point as well is that it should be open to everyone all the time. I think I don't remember one event that 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 was on ticket, or that there was something to pay for the entry. No, am I wrong? No, there was not one
No, not
event like
one.
that.
No, not one.
At the time that HH came into being, were there other spaces dedicated to live art at the time, and not just in Goa? I'm talking about in India besides Coach.
I'm also, and correct me if I'm wrong, Roma and Madhavi, but and I think we weren't necessarily, or even now are not necessarily wholeheartedly committed to just live art. I mean, I think what we're interested in is perhaps a certain kind of politics. And, I think that where we three meet is where our politics converge. And often that has a live element to it. Often artists will have come and worked with us and wanted to explore that, especially because that is at the center of a lot of what we do in our own studio spaces. But even today, I wouldn't say there is a studio space that is committed to the development and the consideration of live art as studio practice. And I think we felt that that was a nerve we could start with. We could start with this idea of creating a live space. And that's why Roma mentions the idea of opening and open, because the idea of opening is actually converting or taking it into the live realm, right? From it just being a studio space for ourselves to noodle around in. So with that said, I'd like to share my screen with some images that we have put together of from various projects that we've done at AHH Art Spaces. And I'll tell you, it was quite nostalgic for us to go into the archive and make this cull. But Roma, I remember that phone call where you said, Nikhil, I found an amazing house with a beautiful garden, and it seems quite affordable. So would you like to come and see it? And I did. And it was literally absolutely love at first sight, because immediately what we started to conceive of was live workspaces for artists, because this was actually a hotel. And we were able to kind of use it as artist studios and run a sort of artist residency space where we would also be creating in our studios in this very house, but we would offer all the spaces possible in this hotel for art to happen. And in this case, you can see Anina, one of our first artists in resident, and her partner Joe, two musicians, came and lived here and sort of activated the space with jam sessions. And then we started to expand and invite artists from Bombay and from our community. And that's where you see Ratna Gupta coming and spending a month here creating, but also wanting to present herself and her body in her pieces.
Yeah, I want to add that because when you were talking about performance art and especially as a studio practice, and which can sound a bit abstract for a lot. I've been like I love the fact that actually when I dug a lot more into performance, especially in Asia, people are not only performance artists. Like actually, they are very rarely performance artists only. They always based on a practice that it's or sculpture or painting or another artistic practice. And that's where it's interesting, because then the performance is like as you said, Nikhil, it's like the engagement of the body as a kind of like need to say more than just produce a painting and then lend it to a gallerist or something like that. There's a real need to actually say something about what is being played out, like maybe more directly in the society and be a bit more concrete or more engaged in the situation.
Yeah.
So then,
yeah.
Okay, Madhavi, go ahead. But I just wanted to ask, so Goa presented itself as this critical place that was no longer rooted in its purely local Goan identity, but that becomes something from where something fresh emerged that went beyond borders and boundaries. And so you activate this space that becomes a place where artists from different places start to come in, and where ideas start to exchange, ferment, new work start to develop, practices start to expand. I'm also curious to know what kind of publics existed in Goa at the time when HH started, because I'm sure that performance I'm not sure that there was actually an audience that existed in Goa. So the audience was cultivated, I think, with HH from the time of your conception, correct?
Actually, there was an audience from the real beginning. Actually, we had like so many. We were actually surprised, but people were so interested in like seeing other things that maybe they can usually see in Goa. I'm not saying it's bad, it's good. It's just that it was not usual. It was changing the landscape of how actually the cultural world in Goa could be received and proposed. And I think there was a very interesting relation on that point. Because the people were, I remember the first open studios, we had like straight from the number 1, 2, 3, like 200 people coming like really on one night. With the very little at the time.
And also the location, if I may add, the location was really fantastic, in fact, because it was almost right en route to the beach, the village, before you sort of get into the beaches in North Goa. And so a lot of people, so there was a lot of public who would come from that front, people engaged in hospitality and nightlife and so on the beach, who have been coming to Goa year after year. So really, people have been visiting Goa for a long time, but also a lot of people from this side who, local artists and the international, even tourists or settlers in Goa, the expats. And it formed a really nice way for people to meet and experience. Somehow Open Studio Nights was like a madhouse, because every room had something going on. If you were in the garden, you would see something. If you were, and the events would run for 6 hours. So through that time, there were people, the numbers sort of increased. We did things, then we realized that we had to do things like for food and a bar. And then we got friends who were already doing this. So they would set up tables, and that's how it became really operative. There was a lot of collaboration in even just making the event happen, and not just from the artists.
So as a collective, did you operate as artists or curators or both?
Well, these are very interchangeable hats. We perform all these roles simultaneously. I mean, we're also co-producers. We are guest house hosts. We are tour organizers. We are travel agents. So it takes a lot to in a sense put these residencies together, invite artists, and create events, and make sure that everything runs through smoothly. And especially since a lot of our artists, we worked with more than 75 artists in the past 6 years, and of which I would say nearly half of them have been international. So, we are, wanting to offer people a certain kind of comfort as well, and a home away from home. And, managing that aspect of it, also in a sense, we started to question, in a sense, the sustainability of running a large space of this nature. But talking about curatorial model, the exhibition that you're looking at right now is a classic example of how, even though we are primarily looked at as a live art space, I mean, this exhibition was so much about the body, where you see Janvi with the little bottles of perfume, who's a perfumer, and Sam Shem, who was a cook and a chef. Minam Apang constructed this bamboo sort of tree climbing scaffolding, and Thomas was able to kind of feed all these people, because he was a potter, and his aesthetic seemed to work with both Sam Shem and Janvi as containers of perfumes and plates. And so in a sense, we are not merely looking at performance, but we're looking at the body. And we were always looking at giving people an experience that just went beyond the two-dimensional painting or the three-dimensional sculpture. But these were all, in a sense, ways for us to immerse audiences and suspend them into this kind of bizarre universe of happenings that took place in each one of these rooms on Open Studio Day. So these 1 month long residencies, which in a sense, we've taken so much from residency models around the world, including Khoj, where this 1 month really becomes this incubation time, this free time, where you are really left to your own talents and your devices to kind of create a work that leads up to Open Studio Day. But I just want to talk about like so many partners that we built, because people could see that we were connecting, not just with artists, but we were connecting with local communities. So we got grants. We managed to win grants from the Inlax Foundation, from the Japan Foundation, I mean, then from Serendipity Arts Trust, from Canadian Art Council. So, this is how we were able to bring, a certain kind of, an international programming as well into our project. But also cultivate not just audiences, but artists from the neighborhood. Raghu Warrior, I mean, is a classic example of how an artist, he's an incredible thinker and a real daring sort of performer. And then you have someone like Durga Gaude, who is sort of probably one of the most important voices in gender non-binary voices. So it also became a place where people would emerge, from where people would emerge. Sorry.
I just wanted to add on that note that people would emerge, and I think one important aspect of that is that HH was kind of like out of the how would you say, out of the market grid and everything, like all its structure as a residency was kind of free for people to come. And our point from the beginning was really to de-dramatize this whole thing, the creation, the piece you're gonna do. The thing is just like, please, let's go. Just go do your stuff, do what you want to do. There's no kind of
Demystify.
program pressure. And when you say curators, our really one important point that we have to kind of like really underline is that in all the projects that we've organized or curated or something like that, one of the big steps for us was actually to choose the right artist. And it was not to kind of write the proper thematic. It was always to find the right people. So that's really important, because then the energy in the heart of HH was always incredible. And one artist will feed the other and respond and rebound. And like, you know, this was really, really organic in the way it was proposed by the Open Studio Day.
I think artists also, I think artists were also artists that were coming in from certain places like Bangladesh or certain countries where they would not be able to find a voice in their own countries, were able to find that and express that at HH, correct?
Yeah, people felt very safe, I think, to work in the way that they wanted. And I think, and some artists would also push us because they wanted to have a certain kind of collaboration. They wanted to do a certain thing. And sometimes we would also get pushed to facilitate, to make it happen, often with lower resources, but what we had, and with other resources, because there was by a certain point, like 3 years down the line, there was so much trust sort of built even amongst the local artists and so many of the international artists who sometimes would come over and over to keep participating in things that we did with HH. So it was actually, really energetic. Also the the houses that we had were quite raw. So there was a lot of potential to work in site-specific ways, you know, maybe transform the space, bring it back to shape again. All of this needed manpower and work, and we managed to do it. And yeah, it was just a safe space to do things.
I also, the point that you made, Roma, about the dismantling and deconstruction of systems, I think it's actually quite important, and also specifically related to your curatorial or de-curatorial and de-artistic strategies. And this element of disobedience and naughtiness that I always felt, at least when I was coming to your space, that I wouldn't say it was a random experience, but it was this sense of disobedience and this sense of completely dismantling my, it's something that I would not have expected. So this unexpectedness of the experience that I was having, and engaging with, if we don't want to call it performance, if we want to call it live art, and engaging with artists in this way that you would not imagine to engage with them. So that's just.
I think if I can, I think it's a good. It's one of the core kind of like. It's maybe the spine of HH actually, because as not being a curator, like there's this kind of feeling when we work on a project, and I think as artists, we want the direct relation with the audience. We like there's kind of like this pleasure to actually say something, and you know it's really, and now I'm talking from my side. It's my point of view about that we need to speak directly. You know, this world is really full of voices, and some are the initiators, and some are working around. And I think it's really important, and in all domains. So I think it's really important to realize that if we want a message to be clear and understood, then the less we have voices that cutting it, then more kind of powerful and linked to the emotional source that it's initiated from, So in that sense, as artists, we kind of like intend to push that system. So if we can work directly with an artist to kind of like make something up, then I think it's like really interesting. We've worked with curators as well, and same story. We choose exactly who we worked with, and like so that's really a matter as well of not falling into the same old path that actually like a lot of people is criticizing, especially those days now after these 2 months of confinement, where we could hear like a lot of theories about what a spectacle is, what a show is, how it's gonna be. Is it supposed to be more local? Do we have to still carry on making big festival and big shows, or small shows and everything? So that's really in the center of our questionment as organizers. And I feel we are digging, and we are kind of creating a path, or trying to create a path where a show or a festival can be proposed in many different ways. And that could be as surprising as you mentioned, and where people can enter and say, okay, there's this new way of seeing things that actually like really is interesting to me, and I feel more that feel more alive and direct and stuff like that.
So tell us a little bit about some of the projects that that took place at HH. There was the Open Studios, there was the Naked
Well,
Sundays. So take us through some of the projects.
well, what you're looking at right now on your screen is actually probably the last image. But you know, if I just want to, I hope it freezes at this image, because this is in a sense where we are right now in as a planet as well. But also just sort of looking at where we are headed. Besides, of course, developing our own program and working with our own impetus and our own desire, I think where we are today we've evolved, I would say. We've definitely changed quite a bit over the years. At the core of what we want to do, it still remains the same. I think we want to challenge systems, also all kinds of systems. And we want to use the space of HH Art Spaces, as Madhavi said, as the safe space to break the rules as you've enjoyed seeing them, Leandra, as well. So we've started partnering. We've started partnering a lot with institutions and organizations where we take on a curatorial role, but also as co-producers, where we continue to use our residency format with institutions and organizations. So in some of the images that you saw, one of our sort of crowning moment, I would say, would be the project that we did for Serendipity Arts Festival 3 years ago, which was The Ground Beneath My Feet, where we were given a barge, essentially a coal-carrying barge, which we essentially converted into a performance space. And we, in a sense, this was in a way for all our, not just curatorial skill, but also our, the kind of experience that we had gathered doing projects in-house. We were getting a chance to take that outside and remodel HH in a completely new avatar, in a completely new situation and set of circumstances, and occupy a barge and convert that into this pulsating performance space. And we had the opportunity to, as you've probably seen in the images, we worked with artists repeatedly over the years, and that's because we've always felt the need to continue the conversation and to continue the dialogue. So going forward, our dialogues are continuing, and we are much more amorphic in our form. And we look forward to doing a project that in Europe in this coming year as well, internationally. So while we're very entrenched in Goa, I think what we're finding quite exciting is how does this format, in a sense, how can we transport this format into other locations, into other spaces, and occupy them and convert them into this fabulous experiment.
So if we're looking at the future right now, and if we're looking at this present moment when so much of our lives are moving onto this virtual space, how do we keep live art relevant? How will it be performed?
Well, as soon as there's somebody to perform and somebody to watch it, it's going to be performance art. I mean, like, the capacity of the people who want to work around that to try to make it accessible is another problem, actually. But the essence of performance is just one person doing something and one other person watching it. So by the end, at the end of the day, we cannot really question that. And I would say more. I would say that really I think it's a good thing that today we have to ask ourselves again this question, because of course the technology is helping a lot, and we can say a lot of. There is some benefit. There is. I mean, some people will say there is. Some people will say that that's a shame. We are purists and everything. I'm not like a purist about like it shouldn't be like streamed or something like that. I'm not saying that, but I think it's really interesting that we ask ourselves this question. Shall we put a little bit more the emphasis about what is important in performance art in general? I think what is really important, between other things, but is the relation between the performer and its audience. And I think that's really the main thing. Like,
I mean, you can't take away, maybe you can take liveness away, but you can't take away performance. I think any task needs a certain kind of performativity. I mean, perhaps one of the most daunting tasks for a painter is to make that first mark on a white canvas. I mean, that requires a certain kind of risk taking or a certain impetus, and that, I would say, is a performance in a sense, not necessarily a performance with a spectacle, but as a spectacle, but it's certainly it's certainly a certain it's becoming a medium, I think, through which the message is conveyed, requires a certain kind of performativity. You can't take that away. I mean, no lockdown, no virus can. And I'd be curious, to see, as Roma said, how audiences will react to that performativity, because we're all doing that right now. I think anyone who is creative is really thinking about their bodies in this confinement quite seriously. And I'm hoping that there is some very new, exciting languages and new exciting ideas emerging from this incubation that's going on in our bodies, in our spaces that we're stuck in.
And are there any new projects that we can look forward to in the coming months?
Yeah, Roma, do you want to talk about what we're doing in?
Talk about Italy. I'll talk about France.
Okay, so we have been invited by a very interesting space called Bagni Misteriosi, which literally translates into mysterious bath. It's an old swimming pool from the kind of fascist period, from a deco building, a sports swimming pool, whose changing rooms and gymnasium has been converted into art exhibition spaces. And in partnership with Galleria Continua in Italy, we're taking 7 artists from India and Pakistan and Bangladesh to Milan to open at the same time as Milan Art Fair and Fashion Week. So we're quite excited, and they're all absolutely new projects. All the artists are making work specifically most of the artists are making work specifically for the exhibition. And they're all and I think we are very excited to see how this project will unfold in April of 2021. So we're looking forward to that. And you'll see us at India Art Fair if it opens. We'll be present there, as we look forward to being present there this year again. So We are very active, and we meet 2 to 3 times a week, and so planning is definitely on. We're also really, besides being sad not to have Roma here during the season, we're also really happy about what Roma is developing in Marseille and in France. Maybe you want to talk about that, Roma.
Yeah, I want to say a few words, not too many, because it's in preparation, and everybody knows how complex are the building of a project. And by the way, that's the good moment to say that if there is, of course, any institution interested in supporting this project in Marseille, what an international city, and like it's really interesting to work there, because it's really sparkling with like diversity and like all this exchange and stuff like that. But yeah, this project is really I'm trying to build this thing with HH, really to make what I've been talking before with you, Leandro, is like this point of like changing this kind of paradigm of like how you apprehend a show. What is a show? What is a group show? It's not going to be in a gallery. It's going to be outdoor. I can say that it's going to be in 2 cities, and it's going to be in 2 skate parks, and it's going to be a show about freedom in its transversality, and cross practices, cross cultures, and to carry on the kind of show that we were building with the ground beneath my feet, and to arrive with this quite interesting and immersive show.
Exciting. Should we start with the audience questions? But before that, I wanted to say that from 2014, there was this impetus and this. There were a lot of young artists that started to experiment with their bodies, and I felt that a lot of them were able to articulate that at HH. I'm wondering now, with the challenges of alternative spaces and the challenges with these protocols of physical distancing, and the challenges of not being able to have that immersive human experience and the relationship between the artist and the audience, what is going to happen to this new spate of young artists coming out, young performance artists?
They will disobey. Yes. They will probably disobey.
Well, I think that, at one level, we shouldn't be on the street too much, but there's a lot of performance art that was happening on the street. Festivals like KPAF and Calcutta and so on were very active on the street. Coach was indoors and outdoors. And I think we would emphasize having performances. We would try to use the house, the location, and the site specificity. But I think the thing is that why art spaces or art centers or art collectives, very often it's not only the pandemic and the protocols of the pandemic, but it is purely sustenance of this kind of practice does become hard. Just becomes hard to have spaces to be able to run and sustain the work. So we just sort of deleted having a permanent space, and we just now focus on the work. But artists will, they will disobey, and they will do what they need to. And, and they will be on the streets performing if they have to, but that's perhaps how it will go.
But, just to also to add to that is, there in our also practice as HH Art Spaces, we've made the distinction between what happens inside and what happens outside. it's very important that what happens inside leads to the outside, right? And there is a really interesting trajectory that we shared with you today of how we work out things in safety of a studio, and then we have a large and sort of more engaged public interaction. Now, while what is threatened at this point is public interaction, what remains unthreatened is this time that we need to work out our ideas inside. And I would say to exercise, artists to exercise just a little bit of patience at this moment, and to use this time to incubate those ideas and to take certain risks on paper and experiment with certain things that you probably would have never had the chance if the market was still alive, if there still had to be going back to that teaching job every day. Now that the schools are closed and you don't have to do that and you're picking up your salary, I think this is a moment to really develop some of those ideas that when the public will come, and when the doors and when the gates will open, they will come in thousands. And we better be prepared for that moment.
All right. One of the questions that we've received, Nikhil, you said that India was emerging in 2012, and there were a lot of experiments. Can you expand on this and the impact it had on performance? I think you were talking about Coach, perhaps, but I think I was going back. I was trying to connect 2000. I was looking at the years 2002, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You know, these 7, 8 years. These were the years where a lot of the kind of established artists were who had gone through Coach actually, and created that career in the 80s and the 90s had gone through Coach, and were now at a place where they were getting a lot of international visibility, as a lot of international curators were very interested in India in those years. And India was circulating worldwide in major public institutions, including the Centre Pompidou and the major museums of contemporary art all over Europe and even Japan. And at that time, simultaneously, as that internationalism India was being exposed internationally, there were experiments that were happening that were quite edgy with sonic art at Coach. And that's where, you know, I met people like Master Justy doing crazy things with sound and really experimenting, or with performance art, with, you know, so these things were really going on simultaneously. That's just was my read of that moment in Indian art history, like in that early time in the 2000s.
Okay, another question is asking about the audience engagement and what levels of engagement either need to be activated during a performance.
I would say that this comes on a, I don't know, emotional, energetic level, like something like that will close a circle between the performers and the audience, something that will create the tension as well. If we talk about participation as something that can be seen a lot, like around some performance, I would say that that is really kind of like that depends on the performance itself, because some you will clearly see that the performers want the engagement of the audience, and maybe some other more subtle practices would just need the attention and not like the participation. That's all I have to say about this. The engagement as the audience.
I mean, even someone is present in a space, you know, I mean, you may think that the audience, or as an audience, you may think of yourself as a passive observer, but that observation is way more active than it is passive. And so sometimes, I mean, you know, it's that the presence is all that one needs to complete that cycle between looking at and being looked at. And it's really nothing more that what one really expects from an audience, other than just being there, being present in the space. And then letting the performance unfold itself and involve the audience in the way in which the performance needs to. But essentially, yeah.
When we look at this aspect of rituals and the ritualistic, and considering that we're a country where rituals are part of our everyday lives and culture, how is, where does performance fit, and in specifically in the public domain, how is that understood, or is it understood, or is it meant to create this diversion or shift in our everyday?
Yes, I mean it's meant to create a kind of alternative belief system. It's the idea, I suppose, is that it is an antithesis to the flow. It's and what is and how does performance challenge that flow? Okay, we in India are very, very performative as a culture, but that said, I think, I mean, it's also all too general for me to say that as well. I think all cultures, all communities, no matter where you are in the world, connect themselves to certain sets of beliefs and systems and create rituals around those systems, whether it is family, whether it is religion, whether it is nation, state, God, institution, whether it is scholarly practice or whether it is religious practice. I think there are rituals attached to each and every one of those acts. I think what performance seeks to do is it seeks to create a completely new, self-created set of rules and regulations within which the rules of rituals that connect to religion, God, family, nationality don't apply anymore, but a whole new set of rules come into play. And I think that in India, we are quite connected and quite deeply connected to our communities, to the extent where we are afraid to let go of parents, community, family, even building society, right? God forbid you came out of your apartment and walked down your staircase in your building naked. So we're very, I would say, we're very afraid to let that go. And I actually urge young artists to sort of to take the risk of letting go of certain sets of beliefs, of these belief systems, so that new belief systems can then emerge. So essentially this, I guess that's all I have to say on all this, on this question.
Okay, one of the questions that we've got is, because this kind of art is a feeling generated through experience, how can it be made to sustain? How can it be productive? I think maybe in the question is more related to how do we understand the value of performance, especially since it is a temporary experience. The memory of it actually in most cases lies in the archive, the photographs, the videos, the drawings.
I started performing really live once we had the space. I did live works mainly in relation to things that happen in the art space. And that was really gave me a lot of confidence, and that feeling of, being alive, to understand what my friends and my spouse and so many people around me were really engaged with. I understood it from a theoretical and sort of critical place from that lens, but not the feeling of being live and watched. And this was really important for me, but I know for a lot of other people as well. And also, and that exchange, the full circle that Roma was talking about. What I didn't have is certain other tools of theater, of choreography, of like being through sort of performance, practice in a certain sense. So how can this experience be productive? I guess one only can feel that it is productive for them, perhaps either at the level of craft or feeling. And the sustenance, yeah, is a question of how much you practice, and then I guess one understands what you do with that practice. Yeah, Roman.
Also, can I add something, Leandro? Because I feel that the sustainability that is like the one that is linked to the feeling, I mean, to the experience of the performance directly, and then you were talking about the archive. How do you archive? How does that work? And so I would say as well that for artists, for performers, the way to find intelligent and coherent way to archive or propose like an object, a painting, installation after the performance is finished is one thing, but it's of course it's linked a lot to the fact that a performer as well to sustain his life. I mean, like, you know, because otherwise at the very core of a performance we can say that if you are here and you feel the thing, then the intensity of the performance will create this sustainability of the experience, because of course it's a live experience. So it's a bit like meeting somebody on the street and falling in love. So there's nothing that you have, I mean, like unless you grab the phone number, but you have nothing in your hand and everything is in your head, and still 1 month, 1 year after, you still think about that. So I guess that's the same kind of ballgame with performance. It's like it's the intensity of the experience, or the aesthetic of the remainings that you are touched by. That both aspects are interesting as well.
Well, making art is one kind of practice, and sustainability of that art is another practice. And it's, I think, very important to know how to feed your art, not just in its imagination, but also economically. And so when you have to feed your art economically, you have to put on another creative hat. And it is the art of sustainability. It's not sustainability in itself. There is an art there too, because the purpose of art is literally is going from one crisis to another crisis. It's not the crisis in itself that's the problem, but the way in which one deals with the crisis is where the art is. So yeah, so we have to think about sustainability just like we think about a painting.
Especially in those times where we think a lot about, we talk a lot about solidarity and how are we going to cope with this. So I think we will need solidarity. So we know now, like, I mean, for everybody who's like from far a little closer in this thing, you know exactly what solidarity we need. We need like a very strong gesture from the institution and the people who really love art and who can sustain as well. So I think it's something that we can't forget, and it's a bit crude when we talk about all the beautiful thing that art is about, but it's something that is completely true, and we cannot do otherwise. I mean,
yeah.
All right, we have time for one last question. Has there ever been a case where performance has gotten in the way of the law? For example, Kirki and walking the streets of Delhi, how do artists navigate that?
You know, I think what we all do in our lives on a daily basis, there are moments where we walk the fine line between what is allowed and what is not allowed. I don't think law has written in a book out there has anything to do with that. I think the laws are, self-written, self-created. I think we ourselves construct our understanding of our boundaries and our understanding of integrities and our moralities. These are constructed by ourselves. I don't need the police or the law books to understand what it is that I am allowing myself to do and not, and what I feel is responsible as a citizen, as an artist, to not just myself, but the community around me. Law has never actually determined that for me.
And what's interesting as well is that we had more, problems like with individual morals, like conservative people and mind, than the law or the police, actually.
Exactly. For
We've been
example.
amazed on the base of like doing an event called Get Naked, something like that. All these little gesture, we had to close the door and all these things, like, but not the law and the police, like directly individuals and their moral.
Exactly.
And I guess that's what art is about. Huh? It's not to change the law or basically to provoke the law. It's another direct conversation with your partner in the society, the one that are around, and to talk directly about the moral issue, the progress that we can make. Or
The point is just to raise questions and concerns, and in this case, you're doing it through the body. And on that note, I wanted to thank the three of you for your time and for a very quite a heated conversation. Actually, it was, and I want to thank our audience for always being, attending all our talks, being consistently engaged, and I look forward to many more conversations and collaborations. Thank you very much, and thank you to our audience. Have a good evening.